So the left loves to overreact about things. If you haven't noticed, I mean they absolutely love to. Trump wants to, actually have adequate national security and have an actual border and improve our immigration system. They say that he's racist. Um, Trump wants to cut the budget in many ways because of obvious overspending and waste, fraud, and abuse in the government, which is pretty clear. They say he wants to basically kill poor people. It's totally absurd. It's just something that is part and parcel for the left. It's one of their main tactics is to always overreact about everything. I think in some ways we may be actually entering a phase where it is starting to fall on deaf ears in many ways. But one of the key areas that the left just loves to freak out about is about climate change. And it's definitely a very sensitive, very touchy subject, obviously, to snowflakes, because they don't want, the planet to heat up, obviously, then they would all just melt away. Wouldn't that just be a horrible thing? So they always freak out about it. They always freak out about, the idea of man-made global warming, climate change, they call it now. It used to actually be global cooling back in the 70s, and it turned into global warming, and now it's just climate change. Literally, any change in the climate is due to humans and unicorn farts, apparently. And the whole climate change argument is completely absurd. The left likes to use ridiculous talking points that they don't even know the substance of. Like they'll throw out the often used statistic that 90 some odd percent of scientists agree about global warming, basically. And they'll throw that statistic out there, and there's been multiple different versions of these studies that have happened, but there's been studies of different papers and research that has been done on climate change, on global warming, and they basically combed through them all and determined through that 97% of the scientists agree on the fact that that global warming is something that's actually happening. And all scientists basically do agree on that. They agree that the planet potentially to some degree is actually heating up a little bit. I'm not even sure if that's true myself, but that is the area where they agree. There and only there. The claim that is thrown out by many on the left is that man-made global warming is going to cause some sort of catastrophic event, of which there is almost zero scientific support to back up that kind of a claim, as I'll go through here in a little bit. So it's totally ridiculous that they throw this sort of insane theory out there that the world is, as Barack Obama put it, going to boil over. He said that to a bunch of Africans as he was basically telling them that they can't have air conditioners and refrigerators, because if they do, then all the extra carbon emissions would cause the world to literally boil over. I'm pretty sure that was his exact quote. So it's just complete and total absurdity. The scientists say that basically excess carbon does contribute to a greenhouse gas effect, that does have some sort of a warming effect. But the idea of that excess carbon emissions are the main factor in climate change, or that they're even a truly significant factor in any real sense, is not something that all scientists agree on. It's not at all. And again, I'll go through that here in a little bit. But I want to illustrate how much the left freaks out about climate change. And it's really illustrated well in this article here from Vox. And of course, Vox is in the same vein as the BuzzFeeds and the Huffington Posts of the world, just total left-wing propaganda, basically, is what it really boils down to. It's not even really a legitimate publication, a legitimate source of news. If you're looking for actual objective journalism, it's just not. It's total left-wing, liberal, biased reporting. So if that's something that you enjoy, go read you some Vox articles. I want to use this to illustrate the absurdity of it, though. So this is from Vox. Trump is pulling the U.S. out of the Paris Climate Agreement. Some men just want to watch the world burn. Yes, they actually are basically comparing Donald Trump to the Joker, from the Dark Knight movies. He just wants to watch the world burn. Apparently, just evil Donald Trump just wants to blow the whole world up. And the Paris climate deal is something I'll get into a little bit more here in a bit. Basically, it was an agreement among basically a couple hundred countries, almost nearly 200 countries, to reduce their carbon emissions. And it would also tax different countries to raise funds to basically help to create more clean, quote-unquote, energy sources, stuff like solar panels and wind and other, forms of energy like that. And there was a ton of problems with the whole thing. First of all, the idea of, man-made climate change being a real serious threat, which the whole climate agreement is basically based off of, is nowhere near the sort of a problem, the sort of a threat that would require this type of action to take place. And that's just the beginning. There are tons of issues with the Paris Accords, which I'll get to in a bit. But first I want to go through this article, because this really illustrates the absurd reaction by many people on the left in the media when it comes to Trump pulling out of this Paris deal. The United States will be withdrawing from the Paris Climate Agreement, President Donald Trump announced Thursday from the White House Rose Garden. Quote, in order to fulfill my solemn duty to protect America and its citizens, the United States will withdraw from the Paris Climate Accord, Trump said. Withdrawing, he said, represents a reassertion of America's sovereignty. He added that he hoped to, quote, begin negotiations to re-enter either the Paris Accord or really entirely new transition on terms that are fair to the United States. The withdrawal process takes 4 years, so we'd withdraw around the time of the 2020 election, but when it's complete, the United States will join a lonely club. Just 2 other countries, Syria and Nicaragua, have rejected the non-binding agreement. Quote, today, the United States will cease all implementation of the non-binding agreements, Trump said, adding that they imposed a, quote, draconian burden on the United States. And now the left-wing bias kicks in. The U.S. is the second largest emitter of greenhouse gases in the world, right behind China. The decision to leave the agreement is a message to the world. We'll take the lead on contributing to the problem, but not fixing it. Trump actually could have gone further. He did not say he was taking the U.S. out of the underlying United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, a global agreement that predates the Paris Treaty. Leaving that would mean abandoning all international cooperative efforts on climate change. In the Rose Garden, Trump says he, quote, cares deeply about the environment, but this move shows quite the opposite. So there you go. You got the headline. Trump just wants to watch the world burn. He says he cares about the environment. Apparently he doesn't, according to Vox. And this is going to be very typical of the media. I mean, this is going to be something that you see throughout the vast majority of the mainstream media publications. They're going to be absolutely condemning this move. They're going to be saying it's horrible. They're going to be saying that the apocalypse is about to happen. It's going to, rain blood, and the entire world is going to just blow up, basically. I mean, they're going to blow the whole thing completely out of proportion, because they really sort of are all in on pushing for this climate change narrative for multiple reasons. Not the least of which that it is basically moving us symbolically, if not in other ways, towards a global government system, which is something that most in the mainstream media would actually love to see happen. So, of course, you've got just total bias coming from the media, and they point out, which is just quite hilarious with no sense of irony, that the U.S. is the second largest emitter of greenhouse gases in the world, right behind China, which is true. What they fail to mention is that in the Paris Accords, which we pulled out of, it allows China and many other countries to be able to increase the amount of coal that they use throughout the year 2030. And I will have you know that in America, we actually have clean coal technology. We have the scrubbers, as they're called, and our in the smokestacks in the coal factories. And what basically comes out of the smokestacks is water vapor, and CO2. Which, of course, CO2 is the big, the big enemy, the big boogeyman of the left. But it's not actually pumping out pollution. With China, you've actually got tons and tons of pollution. These dirty smokestacks that they use, they don't have the same kind of clean technology that we do, and the smokestacks they use are actually quite dirty. So the United States has to cut back on its carbon emissions, while countries like China and India get to increase their carbon emissions, even though they're actually using dirtier forms of the technology. It's not about the environment. The people who are putting together this agreement do not care about the environment. That's not the main goal of this. The goal is a redistribution of wealth and to move closer to a one world government system. Those are the two main aspects of it. You've, of course, got, people in the green industries that are going to be getting hooked up with, sort of crony capitalist deals, and they're going to be allowed to make tons of money off of this. There's just tons of issues with it. The left isn't going to actually explain any of that. They're just going to hope that their constituents, the people that their readers and listeners are completely stupid, basically. They're going to hope that you don't look up any of this stuff. They're going to hope that you just think that because Donald Trump pulled out of this agreement, that the world is going to come to an end. It's totally nonsense, and we will definitely get into the science here in a little bit. But first, I want to get to some more absurdity from the left about this recent development. From The Hollywood Reporter: Stars politicians respond to Trump's plan to withdraw the U.S. from Paris Climate Agreement. Hollywood was quick to respond as President Donald Trump announced he plans to pull the U.S. out of the Paris Climate Accord on Thursday. Former Vice President Al Gore called the decision, quote, reckless and indefensible. In a statement, Gore said, quote, it undermines America's standing in the world and threatens to damage humanity's ability to solve the climate crisis in time. But make no mistake, if President Trump won't lead, the American people will. The Weather Channel updated its homepage to address the potential effects of the announcement. Leonardo DiCaprio, who previously addressed world leaders to join the Paris Agreement, voiced his disappointment on Twitter and urged others to take action. Elon Musk, former founder of Tesla and SpaceX, announced his departure from Trump's advisory council upon the announcement. Don't let the door hit you on the way out. Actor Kal Penn, who worked in the White House Office of Public Engagement under the Obama administration, prompted activism. Obama's former chief speechwriter John Favreau pointed out the potential reasoning for Trump's decision, saying on Twitter, Coulter is at least honest for the reason Trump made this decision, to piss off the left, which that was actually probably just, a fortunate side effect. Director Anna DuVernay summed up the thoughts in just one word: shameful. Shame. 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 Bette Midler took aim at the press for the decision she called, quote, destructive. Filmmaker and activist Michael Moore, everybody's favorite androgynous slug creature, a simple message of what Trump's decision says to the world, and saying on Twitter, USA to Earth, F you. Very, very insightful. Astrophysicist Neil deGrasse Tyson took a jab at Trump's entire administration, saying on Twitter, if I and my advisors had never learned about what science is or how and why it works, then I'd consider pulling out of the Paris Climate Accord as well. So there you have it. You got Neil deGrasse Tyson even coming out and, making these sorts of claims. I'm not sure what his actual qualifications are as any sort of climate scientist. He's said some other pretty absurd things. Again, he's a very smart dude in his own right, for sure. But I'm sure that he's basically just pandering to the left by doing this. Maybe he really believes what he's saying. I don't know. He's not as bad as Bill Nye, the quote-unquote science guy. At least Neil deGrasse Tyson is an actual legitimate scientist. You've got the likes of Bill Nye, who is actually propped up by the left as some sort of, guru, some fount of scientific wisdom, when he's basically he has an engineering degree from like the 70s, and that's it. He's more known as an actor than an actual scientist. Yet people seem to think he's qualified to speak about all these ridiculous things, and so far it seems he's been quite silent on this. I'm sure, however, that old Bill Nye is definitely cooking something up. So there you have it. The left just going insane, going absurd. Everyone from Leonardo DiCaprio to Michael Moore to Neil deGrasse Tyson, and just everyone and their mother coming out and Captain. I'm surprised Captain Planet didn't pop up and say this was the worst decision ever. So it's just ridiculous. It's just absurd. These people like to say that they're on the right side of history. These people like to think that that the left likes to think that they're the party of science, and it's just not true. It's just not true, and I'm going to break all that down right now. So this is from Climate Depot. Danish statistician Dr. Bjorn Lomborg, the president of the Copenhagen Consensus Center, noted in 2017 about the UN Paris Agreement, quote, "We will spend at least $100 trillion in order to reduce the temperature by the end of the century by a grand total of 0.3 of 1 degree. The equivalent of postponing warming by less than 4 years, again, that is using the UN's own climate prediction model." So, and this is what they said that should be done. They said that we should have it's something like $10 trillion globally per decade, and $100 trillion by the end of the century, to, as the Danish statistician said, to reduce the temperature by 1/3 of a degree, or just insane. 0.3 of 1 degree. Just totally insane. That is just a minuscule, completely minuscule amount. That would be the reduction by the end of the century, using their own prediction, after spending $100 trillion. MIT climate scientist Dr. Richard Lindzen, believing CO2 controls the climate, says believing CO2 controls the climate is, quote, pretty close to believing in magic. Lindzen, doubling CO2 involves a 2% perturbation to this budget, so do minor changes in clouds and other features, and such changes are common. In this complex multi-factor system, which is the likelihood of the climate, which itself consists of in many variables, which is not just a globally average temperature anomaly, is controlled by this 2% perturbation in a single variable. Believing this is pretty close to believing in magic. Instead, you are told that it is believing in science. Such a claim should be a tip-off that something is amiss. After all, science is a mode of inquiry rather than a belief structure. So basically she's saying there that there are many different factors that control the climate, and CO2 is one of them. And to say that CO2 is the main driving force, the main factor that that would be the cause of this supposed 2% increase, it's completely absurd. It's ignoring the multitude of other factors that contribute to climate change, and that is just the beginning. So it goes on. The accumulation of false and or misleading claims is often referred to as the overwhelming evidence for forthcoming catastrophe. Without these claims, one might legitimately ask whether there is any evidence at all. Renowned Princeton physicist Freeman Dyson says, quote, "I am 100% Democrat and I like Obama, but he took the wrong side on the climate issue, and the Republicans took the right side." Dyson also said, "What has happened in the past 10 years is that the discrepancies between what's observed and what's predicted have become much stronger." I mean, they'll come out with absurd predictions. I mean, Al Gore will come out and say, you know, in his what is it, the Inconvenient Truth movie or whatever they did, he just did some garbage sequel, that by, what was it, like 2013 or something like that, the poles would, the North and South Pole would basically be gone, and then all the polar bears were going to die off. It's not true at all. Antarctica is actually got is gaining more ice than it's actually losing, and there's more polar bears than ever, in some estimates. It's just absurd. It's just an absurd claim. It's just not true, and these sort of predictions get put out time and time again, and they get proven wrong time and time and time again, and yet they just keep on putting them out there. Nobel Prize winning scientist Dr. Ivar Gavier, who endorsed Obama, now says President Obama was ridiculous and is dead wrong on global warming. Dr. Gavier also said, quote, "Global warming is a non-problem. I say this to Obama. Excuse me, Mr. President, but you're wrong. Dead wrong." He further said, "Global warming really has become a new religion." And it totally is, too, because you've got people on the left who don't know anything. They don't know any of the science. They look at, they get talking points from the Democrats and from the media, and they regurgitate them. They think that, they've been the hottest years on record. They think that, the polar ice caps are, going to continue to melt, and that just all these ridiculous, absurd things that, as we continue on here, you will see are just not true. Green guru James Lovelock reverses belief in global warming and now says, "I'm not sure the whole thing isn't crazy." He now condemns the green movement. "It's a religion, really. It's totally unscientific." UN IPCC Japanese scientist Dr. Kiminori Atoa, an award-winning PhD environmental physical chemist, says, quote, "Global warming fears are the worst scientific scandal in history. When people know what the truth is, they will feel deceived by science and scientists." UN IPCC lead author Dr. Richard Toll-Bolt's warmist narrative calls Gore's claim, quote, "complete madness," says, "It disturbs me hearing people like Al Gore say that he is worried about the future of his grandchildren. Complete madness." And again, Al Gore has like multiple, mansions basically, and he's got a larger carbon footprint than probably, 20 entire African villages combined. I mean, it's totally ridiculous. The guy is an absolute fraud, an absolute joke, and it's really sickening that people actually look up to him as some sort of weird guru on climate change when basically all the claims he's made about climate change have been provably wrong. I mean, it's just absurd. Global temperatures have been holding nearly steady for almost 2 decades, according to satellites from the Remote Sensing Systems, RSS, and the University of Alabama at Huntsville, UAH. So, of course, the left always comes out and says that, the planet's been warming. And we'll get into it a little bit more in detail, but it just is not what people think it is. The warming is minuscule that there is, if there even is any, and what we really see is basically a pause in warming. There was a warming period, and for the last I don't even know, it's like 18 years or something like that, I believe, we've actually been in a pause, more or less, in the warming of our atmosphere. And it's just put out there from the left that the planet has just been continuing to heat up and heat up and heat up. And as you can see here, when you look at the actual satellite data, which many people think is the most, or one of the most accurate forms of gathering this type of data, it just doesn't show that a warming trend at all. It shows a pause, and it goes on. Global warming proponents, based heavily on altered surface data, declared 2005, 2010, 2015, and 2016 to be the, quote, hottest years on record. But a closer examination reveals that claims were based on year-to-year temperature data that differ by only a few hundredths of a degree to tenths of a degree Fahrenheit, differences that were within the margin of error of the data. So, first of all, the satellite data doesn't show any warming trends. It shows a pause, basically. And there are some scientists that say that we're actually possibly going to be entering into a new ice age soon. I mean, we're actually overdue for one by thousands of years. So, I mean, it's just, totally absurd on that level, of course. But it's a few hundredths of a degree. A few hundredths of a degree, the supposed warming in all these different years that they say, the increase in warming. A few hundredths of a degree, which, as it says here, is within the margin of error. That could have just been it's statistically invalid, basically. It's not even worth mentioning. It could just completely be wrong, 100%. And even if it is right, you're talking about such a minute, minuscule increase in temperature. And then again, CO2 is not the main driving factor in climate change. It's one of many factors. So, I mean, it just, the more you look into it, the more you actually look at the science, the more the entire thing just crumbles. It just falls apart. MIT climate scientist Dr. Richard Lindzen ridiculed these hottest year claims, saying, quote, "The uncertainty here is tenths of a degree. It's just nonsense. This is a very tiny change, period," Lindzen said. "If you can adjust temperatures to 2/10 of a degree, it means it wasn't certain to 2/10 of a degree. In addition, the hottest year claims are based on surface data only dating back to the late 19th century. They also ignore the temperature revisions made by NASA and NOAA that have enhanced the warming trend by retroactively cooling the past." And of course, this has been, of global warming proponents, in the scientific community. Unfortunately, there has been case after case after case after case of them tampering with data, altering data, just using fraudulent methods and techniques. I mean, it's just ridiculous. It's completely politically motivated, and it's really not even about the environment to many of the people that are pushing the climate change agenda, like someone like Al Gore. I mean, give me a break. He's in it to capitalize on the whole madness of the whole situation, and basically capitalize on a non-existent crisis. It's totally absurd, and he's a total fraud, and the majority of the people involved in the climate change agenda, for one reason or the other, are knowingly involved in a massive fraud on multiple levels. It's pretty insane, really. Hottest year claim. They also ignore sorry. Many peer-reviewed studies have found the medieval warm period was as warm or warmer than current temperatures. And that's one example. We've seen, through the best scientific methods that we have available, that time and time again throughout the planet's history, it has warmed up, it has cooled down. We've had ice ages, we've had periods of, intense heat, droughts. I mean, the climate just always changes. That's where they're right. Yeah, climate change. Yeah, the climate changes. Yeah, good observation. Thank you, Captain Obvious. But the idea that it's man-made climate change, that it's because of carbon emissions, is just absurd. The science is just not there to support that claim on any level at all. And the claims that are made by the global warming proponents are time and time again these projections that go, decades into the year, into the future many times, and are proven to be wrong again and again and again. So, it's a fraudulent agenda, is basically what it boils down to. In February 2017, a NOAA whistleblower, Dr. John Bates, revealed a temperature pause-buster scandal. Dr. Bates detailed how a federal study exaggerated global warming and was timed to influence the UN Paris Agreement. So this guy was a NOAA, scientist, and he was, doing climate science for, the UN as they're trying to basically set up the Paris Climate Agreement, which Trump now exited us from, thankfully. And he came out as a whistleblower and was saying, look, they're using methods, and they're actually tampering with data and knowingly using methods that are going to show a larger warming trend than there actually is. And, this is something that, this is not the first time that this has happened. There was emails that were leaked a few years ago that were showing that they were actually trying to hide the pause again in previous years, and this is just another attempt of doing that. So you've definitely got a politically motivated agenda to push for climate change, and they're putting that political agenda ahead of actual ethical legitimate scientific research, which is a big problem for sure, and I'm sure most people would agree with that. In 2017, Professor Roger Pelkey Jr. testified to Congress there was simply no evidence that hurricanes, floods, droughts, and tornadoes are increasing. And of course, that's another one that they throw out there. They say all these natural disasters have been worse than they've ever been. I mean, they just lie, you guys, people. They just lie to your face. You gotta understand that if you don't already, which I'm sure you probably do. In his 2014 testimony on the current state of weather extremes, Professor Pelkey said, quote, "It is misleading and just plain incorrect to claim that disasters associated with hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, or droughts have increased on climate timescales, either in the United States or globally." So it's all just fake news, in other words. Tornadoes failing to follow, quote, global warming, that was a tongue twister, predictions. Big tornadoes have seen a drop in frequency since the 1950s. The years 2012, 2013, 2014, 2015, and 2016 all saw at or near record low tornado counts in the U.S. But again, you will see people on the left and on the mainstream media come out and say that these types of natural disasters are increasing and are worse than they've ever been because of climate change. They just make this stuff up. It's totally absurd, but it's the level that, unfortunately, many on the left have sunk to. Actual NOAA tornado data for 2016 revealed the year was one of the quietest since records began in 1954 and below average for a fifth year in a row. A 2015 NASA study found that Antarctica was not losing ice mass and, quote, not currently contributing to sea level rise, but was actually reducing sea level rise. Again, a NASA study. The NASA study also found that the ice mass gains of the Arctic ice sheet are greater than their losses. Again, a NASA study. And you've got the left constantly saying the poles are shrinking, the polar bears are dying, it's going to be, it's just going to be a desert planet soon. And it's just a lie. It's just not true. It's just not true. They just hope the people that they're saying this stuff to are dumber than a box of rocks. I mean, I hate to be that blunt, but it's true. It's totally absurd. You got people like Neil deGrasse Tyson coming out and saying that the Trump administration is basically anti-science, and if they, his advisors didn't know anything about science, he'd probably pull out of the climate science, the Paris Accords too. It's just completely ridiculous. You can look at it from almost any angle of the Paris Climate Accord. It's not going to actually, even if you think global warming is real and an actual threat, the solutions put forward by the Paris Accords, again, would only, by the end of the century, reduce it by 0.3 of a degree. I mean, that is nothing. That's completely minuscule. Until 2030, countries like India and China are going to be able to continue producing and increasing the amount of coal energy that they produce, even though they pump out dirty, coal, using technology that's not nearly as far along and well developed as ours. I mean, you've got the fact that energy prices are going to rise. That could potentially actually kill people in the third world. So you've just got problem after problem after problem with the Paris Accords. When you look at the actual science of climate change, it shows very clearly, when you look at the actual science, that if there is any warming at all, it is completely minuscule, and the solutions put forward by the Paris agreements wouldn't actually do anything to actually help the problem, basically. After spending $100 trillion over a decade, by the end of the century, just total madness is all it is. And you're going to have companies, these green, clean energy companies that are going to get these sweet contracts and deals and are going to be able to, be put in a prime position, because they're not going to actually have the competition of the coal industries, which coal is, again, the cheapest and most abundant form of energy that we have available to us. In the United States, coal used to be about half of the energy that we used. Obama, imposed massive, regulations on the coal industry, literally said that you can start up a coal plant, but we're going to bankrupt you, basically. And what that wound up doing is shutting down, large portions of the coal industry. Now, the energy that we get from coal is about 1/3. Of course, all these magical green, forms of energy weren't able to actually adequately fill that gap. What happened? Energy prices in the U.S. went up. That's just the way it works. So the science isn't there. It wouldn't actually help the problem, even if there was a problem to fix. You've got, the globalist agenda that is totally behind this, trying to push for a one world government. You're going to have massive redistribution of wealth, and, it is a mess. It's a total mess, and it is a great thing that President Trump pulled us out of this. I gotta say, this is something that makes me pretty happy that I voted for President Trump. And I want to end with this article from Town Hall, and it really sums up in a few key points why why exiting the Paris treaty, well, it was actually supposed to be a treaty. The Senate never ratified it, though. So that's just another reason that it was a good thing that we moved out of it. And he really sums up nicely in a few points why it is so terrible and why it would actually be harmful to the poor, who are one of the main people that supposedly would be helped by this through funding, but it turns out that that's going to be completely offset by the rising prices in energy. So again, here's this town hall article. We owe it to the poor to exit the Paris Climate Treaty. And here's the 6 points. Number 1, warming over the last 50 years or so has averaged only about half what computerized climate models can explain. Yet those models are the basis for the Paris Agreement. Number 2, it is not obvious that recent warming is entirely the fault of our CO2 emissions. It is very possible that temperatures during the medieval warm period were just as warm as today. Natural climate change exists. If we didn't cause it, we can't fix it. Number 3, even if future warming increases to match the models, and all nations abide by the Paris committees, we will avert only 0.3 degrees Fahrenheit warming by the year 2100. That's less than 0.04 degrees Fahrenheit per decade, which is unmeasurable by current global temperature monitoring networks, satellites, surface thermometers, and weather balloons. Hence, the very possible prospect of a pause in global warming, global temperature increases, not actual increasing. Not on any level that is even statistically significant. Number 4, the cost of this unmeasurable impact on future global temperatures is variously estimated to be around $1 trillion per year, primarily spent by the US and a few other countries which drive global prosperity. As usual, the poor will be the hardest hit. That money could have been spent on clean water and providing electricity to the 1+ billion humans who still don't have electricity. Number 5, China and India, which are burning coal like there is no tomorrow, it's dirty coal, I will remind you, don't really have to do anything under the agreement until 2030. It's mainly up to the US to cut our emissions and send our wealth to poor countries where dictators will continue to enrich themselves. Number 6, and the final point, increasing CO2 levels have benefits such as increased crop productivity and global greening. Life on Earth requires CO2, and over the last 60 years, we have been monitoring its levels in the atmosphere. Mother Nature has been gobbling up 50% of what we emit to create even more life. So, with that last point, who knows, how much credibility there really is to that. Of course, everybody knows this is basic, middle school science class. You inhale oxygen, you exhale CO2, plants breathe in the CO2. That's, how they survive. So, when you've got the clean energy production that we do in this country, again, it's nothing that comes out of those smokestacks except water vapor and CO2. They try to say that CO2 is this big, problem, this boogeyman. The science says that it's not. It's not. The warming that's being caused, the degree to which it's being caused by increases in CO2 is minimal, and that's a portion of supposed increases in temperature, which themselves are absolutely minimal when you take in all the different factors that affect the environment. It's all within the margin of error, and you've got these scientists that are caught time and time again actually tampering with the data to try to increase the warming trends. You've got the satellite data that shows that there has been actually a pause. I went through quote after quote from different scientists, some of them actual, IPCC, International Panel on Climate Change scientists, and MIT scientists and physicists and climatologists. There is not a scientific consensus that man-made global warming is going to cause the world to blow up or some sort of disaster. It's just not true. It's just not true at all. And don't let the phony hack Democrats and the hatchetman, media establishment on the left and just all these just globalist minions basically come out and try to get you to believe that what President Trump did is going to, be the worst thing for the world since Adolf Hitler. It's just not true. It's totally absurd. This was going to be a terrible deal for our country. It's a great thing that President Trump exited the Paris Accords, and I gotta say, I am actually quite proud of the president for doing that. That took some serious huevos. I gotta say, it's really Donald Trump against the world at this point. And you know, President 45 is definitely fulfilling some pretty serious campaign promises at this point. And this is, I mean, you already hear the shrill, you know, vitriolic shrieks of hatred coming from the left and the media and different world leaders. I mean, just howling in absolute terror at this. And that right there is how you know President Trump did the right thing. So with that, I will bid you all adieu. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please subscribe, leave me a comment. If you'd like to hear the audio version of this, I'll have that on SoundCloud. Also, you can follow me on Twitter or like me on Facebook. I will have the links to all that in the description. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and may the force be with you.